This presentation will tell you what to expect from your employer and discuss steps to protect you from exposure to pesticides and their residues at your work site. EPA has approved this material for training workers and handlers on pesticide safety in accordance with the 2015 Worker Protection Standard Expanded Training Content. The approval number is EPA Worker and Handler PST 00022. Trainers must provide the training as required by the revisions to the 2015 Worker Protection Standard Rule. Trainers must adhere to the training administration requirements from the 2015 Worker Protection Standard. It is the responsibility of your employer to provide you with information about and protections from potential risks from pesticides when you are working in areas where pesticides are being used and pesticide residues may be found. By completing this pesticide safety training, you and your employer will be in compliance with the annual training requirements of the Worker Protection Standard Regulation, often referred to as WPS. This training will inform you of ways to minimize your exposure to pesticides and reduce your risk of being injured or made ill, and ways you can protect your family too. If you have any questions during this presentation, make sure to ask your employer or whoever is presenting this information. You will be trained today as either a worker or a handler. A worker is a person who is employed, including self-employed, on an agricultural establishment and is doing work such as harvesting, weeding, pruning, or irrigating for the production of agricultural plants on farms, forests, and in nurseries or enclosed space production areas, such as greenhouses. Your employer must not ask or direct workers to mix, load, or apply pesticides. Handlers are employed to mix, load, or apply agricultural pesticides, assist with the pesticide application, dispose of pesticides or opened pesticide containers that have not been cleaned, handle opened containers of pesticides when emptying, triple rinsing, or cleaning pesticide containers according to pesticide product labeling, clean, adjust, handle, or repair the parts of mixing, loading, or pesticide application equipment that may contain pesticide residues, and work as a flagger. Handlers also perform other tasks in direct contact with pesticides. Handlers must be at least 18 years old. Workers should never be asked or directed to mix, load, or apply pesticides or to assist in their application without the proper training and protection as a pesticide handler. Please note that pesticide handlers under the WPS are different than Iowa certified handlers. Under the WPS, handlers are employed to mix, load, transfer, or apply agricultural pesticides. Iowa certified handlers cannot apply pesticides. Handlers work directly with pesticides. Workers do not. However, since workers may work in recently treated fields or near areas where handlers mix, load, apply, or store pesticides, both workers and handlers need to know what pesticides are and when they might come in contact with them. The word pesticide is a general term used to describe a substance or mixture that kills a pest or prevents or reduces the damage a pest may cause. Pests can be insects, mice, or other animals, unwanted plants such as weeds, fungi, bacteria, or viruses. Examples of pesticides include herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. They are effective and safe when used properly. However, if used improperly, they can harm people and the environment. Pesticides can be found in different forms, including liquids, dusts, and granules, gases like fumigants, or as a residue. A pesticide residue is what is left after a plant or surface has been treated. Residues are not usually visible and can remain on a plant many days after spraying. The contact you have with a pesticide or pesticide residue is called pesticide exposure. You may be exposed to pesticide residues found in or on soil and treated plants, and tractors, sprayers, and other application equipment. You may also come into contact with pesticide residues on work clothing, shoes, and used personal protective equipment, also called PPE, and in pesticide mixing and loading areas. You may also find pesticides in the air as dust or vapors, or when a nearby pesticide application spreads beyond the application site. This is called drift. If you are working in a field where someone is applying a pesticide, or if a pesticide from a nearby application is drifting into your work area, leave the area and tell your supervisor immediately. Pesticides may also be found in irrigation water as a result of pesticide runoff or chemigation. Chemigation is the use of irrigation water to apply pesticides to soils and crops. Because of this, you should never use irrigation water for drinking or washing. Pesticides can enter your body through your mouth, nose, eyes, and skin. The majority of the reported cases of agricultural pesticide exposure involve skin exposure. This happens when your skin comes in direct contact with treated plants, soil, irrigation water, farming equipment, dirty hands, and dirty work clothing. This could appear as a rash or redness, blisters, and other skin irritations. Some types of pesticides readily penetrate the skin and get into your body. Pesticides can also get into your eyes from pesticide drift or pesticide-contaminated dust and plant material. You may inadvertently get pesticides in your eyes if you rub your eyes with unwashed hands. Another way you can come in contact with pesticides is by breathing them in through your nose. You can inhale vapor or dusts from pesticide drift or by entering treated areas. You can transfer pesticide residues from your hands to your mouth if you drink, smoke, eat, chew tobacco, or chew gum without first washing your hands. Pesticide residues that remain on treated plants can contaminate food, drinks, or cigarettes brought into the field or greenhouse. Do not eat produce taken from recently sprayed areas and eat them without washing them first. Also, do not eat or drink from any container used for pesticides, even if it has been washed, and do not drink irrigation water. Some people may be harmed by exposure to pesticides more than others. Exposure to some types of pesticides may be immediate, or the illness or injury may appear at some later time. These illnesses or injuries can be serious and could result in lost work time and require medical treatment. Acute effects happen quickly during or after the exposure. Delayed effects may take time to develop after an exposure. Chronic effects are the result of exposures over a long period of time, perhaps as long as 10 to 20 years. These exposures can be very small amounts that are taken in by the body and add up over the years. Sensitization is the gradual development of an allergic reaction to pesticides. Acute pesticide injury may include symptoms such as skin rashes, blisters, skin irritation, eye, nose, and throat pain, headaches, sweating, chest pain, difficulty breathing, vomiting, or loss of consciousness. This can be serious, requiring medical treatment, absence from work, and even death. Severe poisoning can result in chest pain, breathing difficulties, excessive salivation or drooling, very small pupils, lack of muscle control, convulsions, and unconsciousness. If you are exposed to certain fumigant gases, poisoning symptoms may also include irrational behavior and elevated body temperature. Long-term health effects associated with exposure to certain pesticides may include cancer, inability to become pregnant, miscarriage, birth defects, nervous system disorders, damage to organs such as the lungs or liver, and damage to the immune system. There are hazards to children and pregnant women from pesticide exposure. Pesticide exposure can be hazardous for pregnant women and may result in miscarriage or cause harm to their unborn child. Children are often more susceptible to the effects of pesticides as their bodies and internal organs are still developing and may be negatively impacted by exposure. Keep all non-working family members and children away from areas where they may risk exposure to pesticides and pesticide residues. Since pesticide residues are usually invisible, it is often difficult for you to avoid contact. Therefore, you should take steps to protect yourself from exposure to these residues. The first step to preventing pesticide exposure is understanding who is allowed to enter the area during the application, during the restricted entry interval, and after the restricted entry interval expires. The REI is the amount of time that must pass after a pesticide application before it is safe for workers to enter the area without the required PPE and additional protections. The warning sign should not be posted, and oral warnings must have elapsed for a worker to enter the area. Only appropriately trained and equipped handlers can enter and work in areas during a pesticide application. During the REI, only appropriately trained and equipped handlers and early entry workers are allowed in the area. After the REI expires, all WPS-trained employees are allowed into the treated area, which is the term used to describe an area that was treated with a pesticide within the previous 30 days. In some instances, your employer may ask you to work in a treated area before the expiration of an REI. This is called early entry work. To do early entry work, you must be at least 18 years old. Your employer must give you additional instructions and information about the hazard of the pesticide that was applied and the task you're being asked to do. You would also be provided with personal protective equipment and the instruction on how to use and remove it properly. Your employer must provide you with information about the pesticides you may come in contact with while working on the establishment. This information and related pesticide information, which we will talk about next, are located in a central location on the establishment. This is an area at the worksite that you can visit on a regular basis and that is accessible at all times during your normal work hours. Your employer must tell you where that central location is, and you must have access to it so you can refer to the information on it. Your employer will provide information about pesticide safety, the emergency contact, pesticide regulatory agency contacts, and pesticide applications at the central location. Also at the central location, your employer will provide basic pesticide safety information on ways to reduce your exposure to pesticides and pesticide residues, as well as the name, phone number, and address of the nearest medical facility in case of a medical emergency. Contact information for the local pesticide regulatory agency will also be listed. In Iowa, the local regulatory agency is the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. At the central location, your employer will provide written information on pesticides that have been applied at your worksite. This includes the length of the restricted entry interval. The length of an REI is not always the same and varies with the pesticide that has been applied. Your employer will also display safety data sheets, often abbreviated as SDS, at the central location for all pesticides used at the worksite that you may come in contact with. Safety data sheets provide information about the hazards of the pesticides that are used where you work, including details of emergency medical treatment and other information. After a pesticide has been applied, all information for that application is kept at your worksite for 2 years. You may request access to these records at any time. You may designate a representative to request on your behalf pesticide application and hazard information. A designated representative is a person chosen by a worker or handler who can request and obtain a copy of the pesticide application and hazard information on behalf of the worker or handler. The designation of the representative and the request for information must be made in writing. Your employer will tell you about pesticide applications and restrictions at your worksite. This can be done orally in a language or manner that you can understand, or by posting a warning sign at the application area. When you see this sign, do not go into this area. The sign means that the area has been treated with pesticides. After the REI has expired and all treated area warning signs have been removed or covered, you may then re-enter areas that have been treated. Your employer may direct a handler to post treated areas. It is against the law for anyone to apply pesticides in an area where you are working or to let pesticides drift onto you. You should leave immediately if you are working in an area where someone is applying a pesticide or if a pesticide from a nearby application is drifting towards you. Workers and handlers can also come into contact with pesticides through drift if their homes are located near pesticide-treated areas. Handlers must suspend the application if workers are in the area they are treating. Always wear work clothing that protects you from contact with pesticide residues. These include a long-sleeve shirt, long pants, shoes, and socks. Residues can be transferred from your hands to your eyes, mouth, and to sensitive skin that can readily absorb pesticides into your body. Washing your hands reduces that movement of residues. To protect your health and minimize your exposure to pesticides and pesticide residues, make the following a regular part of every workday. Wash your hands before touching your eyes or mouth. Wash your hands before eating, drinking, smoking, chewing gum, or chewing tobacco. Remember to wash before using the restroom to keep pesticide residues from sensitive skin. Your employer will have decontamination supplies nearby. These include soap, single-use towels, and enough water for emergency washing, emergency eye flushing, and routine washing. For workers, supplies will generally be located within a quarter-mile of your work site. Decontamination supplies for handlers must be available at the mixing sites. If another source of clean water, such as a stream, spring, or lake, is closer to you than the decontamination supplies, use that water source instead. Handlers also must have access to a change of clothing to use if their work clothing or PPE becomes contaminated. At home, do the following to minimize contact with pesticides and pesticide residues. To avoid bringing pesticide residues into your home, remove your work shoes before entering. As soon as possible, shower or bathe after work. Wash your hair with shampoo and soap and change into clean clothes before you have any physical contact with children and your family. Put your work clothes into a bag to prevent others from coming into contact with them. There are potential hazards from pesticide residues on clothing. Wash your work clothes before wearing them again. Wash your work clothes separately from all other laundry. Tell the person washing your clothes that they may have pesticide residues on them. You should never take any pesticides home for use there. Pesticides used at your work are not intended for use in your home and present risks to you and your family. Never take pesticide containers home, even if empty and rinsed. A pesticide container is never completely free of pesticide residues and can never be safely used for any other purpose. It is dangerous and illegal to pour pesticides from their original containers into any other container that does not have the original label, including food or beverage containers. Accidentally drinking pesticides can be fatal, and children can easily mistake a bottle with liquid in it for a drink. If you think you have symptoms caused by pesticide exposure, contact your supervisor. He or she will make sure that you get medical attention immediately. In an emergency, your employer must provide you with immediate transportation to the nearest emergency medical facility. Your employer will give the emergency medical personnel a copy of the safety data sheet, specific information about the product, the circumstances of application or use of the pesticide, and the circumstances of the exposure. If you or a coworker is exposed to a pesticide, there are some things that can be done immediately to reduce the effects of the exposure before you are taken to a medical facility. Act quickly and know where to find information about the pesticides used at your work site. Always protect yourself before you step in to help others. If pesticides are spilled or sprayed on your body, remove the pesticide-contaminated clothing and use decontamination supplies to wash immediately. If more readily accessible, use a nearby body of water to rinse off, then follow up with the decontamination supplies and use soap. As soon as possible, shower with soap and water, shampoo your hair, and change into clean clothes. If a pesticide gets into someone's eye, the eye should be held open and rinsed for 15 minutes with a gentle stream of cool, clean water or rinsed with an eye flush kit. Immediate and severe poisoning can occur if someone accidentally drinks a pesticide. In this case, it is very important to get the affected person to a medical facility as quickly as possible. If you are considering inducing vomiting, read the label or safety data sheet first. Induced vomiting can cause more damage depending on the pesticide that was swallowed. First aid for a person who has inhaled pesticide mists or vapors includes taking that person to fresh air and loosening any clothing that might make breathing difficult. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation should be performed only by a trained person if the victim has stopped breathing. For all these exposures, get the person to medical attention as soon as possible. You cannot be retaliated against for complying or attempting to comply with the Worker Protection Standard. If your employer is punishing you for attempting to comply with the Worker Protection Standard, or you have pesticide-related questions, concerns, or complaints, contact the state pesticide agency responsible for pesticide enforcement. The contact information is available to you at the central location. In Iowa, contact the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. This concludes the worker portion of this training. If you have any additional questions, ask your employer or whoever is presenting this information now. The remainder of this presentation is for handlers only. In addition to the topics covered so far, handlers must receive training on how to safely and effectively handle agricultural pesticides. You must handle pesticides safely to minimize your exposure and exposure to other people and the environment. Your job may involve mixing, loading, transferring, and/or applying pesticides, assisting with pesticide applications, disposing of pesticides or opened pesticide containers that have not been cleaned, handling opened containers of pesticides when emptying, triple rinsing, or cleaning pesticide containers according to pesticide product labeling, cleaning, adjusting, handling, or repairing the parts of mixing, loading, or pesticide application equipment that may contain pesticide residues, working as a flagger, or performing other tasks in direct contact with pesticides. You will be told by your employer of any entry restrictions, application exclusion zones, or restricted entry intervals that may apply when doing handler tasks. Your employer will also provide you with instructions on how to safely operate the equipment you will use to mix, load, transfer, or apply pesticides before you use it. Because pesticides that have not yet been mixed are often in concentrated form, they can be especially dangerous. When mixing and loading, follow these safety practices. Wear the personal protective equipment listed on the pesticide label for handling pesticides. Read the label directions to find out how much pesticide you need, and then open the containers and measure it carefully. Using too much or too little can cause problems for the applicator, crop, and the environment. If you are not able to read the label yourself, your employer must provide you with information and instructions about the specifics of safe use and the labeling requirements. Prevent pesticides from entering the water source by keeping the hose above the level of the liquid in the tank or by using special equipment called a check valve to prevent backflow. Never mix, load, or clean equipment near ponds, streams, wells, or ditches because rinse water containing pesticides, called rinsate, could overflow and run off into these water sources. When applying pesticides, follow these safety practices. Follow the application instruction on the pesticide label. If you are not able to read the label yourself, your employer must provide you with information and instructions about the specifics of safe use and the labeling requirements. After putting on the label-required PPE, check the application equipment to make sure that there are no leaks. If repairs need to be made, keep your PPE on and turn equipment off before fixing the equipment. Never apply pesticides so they can get on people, either directly or through drift. Stay alert while you are applying the pesticide. Look at the area you have just treated to be sure you are applying the pesticide evenly and the coverage looks right. Watch for clogged nozzles and other equipment issues during the application. When you finish the application, clean the equipment following your employer's instructions. When transporting pesticides, especially containers that have already been opened, always do the following. Transport pesticides in the truck bed, cargo area, or on the back of the spray rig. Check containers for leaks before loading and unloading. Protect containers from rain and other potential weather damage. Secure or tie down all pesticide containers in the cargo area. Monitor containers at all times during transportation. Keep containers in a locked area if possible. Never carry pesticides in the passenger compartment of any vehicle or transport food, animal feed, or clothing with pesticide containers. Never leave pesticide containers unattended. Pesticide spills can occur during any handler task. A good way to remember the steps to cleaning up a spill is the 3 C's: control, contain, and clean up. Put on the label-specified personal protective equipment before contacting any pesticide or breathing fumes. Make sure the spill is stopped by shutting off the mixing or application equipment if it is leaking. Turn the container upright if it has fallen. If the container is broken or leaking, put it inside another container. Stop the spill from spreading by using commercially available snakes or pillows from a spill kit, or making a dike of soil, sod, or other absorbent material around the spill area. Do not use water on the spill. It will only spread it further. Clean up the spill. Soak up liquid spills with absorbent materials like cat litter, sand, or clay. If the pesticide or absorbent material is likely to blow around, moisten it very slightly with water or cover them with a sweeping compound or plastic covering. Sweep the spill and cleanup materials into a leak-proof container for proper disposal. If you work in a storage area for pesticides or pesticide containers, make sure that the containers are closed tightly and stored upright. Check all containers for leaks, breaks, or weak spots. Tell your supervisor immediately if there is a problem. Clean up spills and leaks right away. Lock the storage area to make sure that unauthorized people and animals cannot get into the storage area. Occasionally, you may have leftover pesticides that you can no longer use. Contact the manufacturer to see if they can be returned or dispose of them as a pesticide waste, according to state and local regulations. Store the pesticides carefully in a locked storage area until they can be disposed of properly. Pesticide labels provide information on container disposal. Some containers are refillable and intended to be filled with pesticide more than once. Other containers are non-refillable and should be rinsed immediately after emptying. Always comply with label directions and with federal, state, and local laws and regulations. Read the pesticide label before applying pesticides to avoid injury to plants or animals and contamination of soil and water. Drift is the movement of pesticide dust, spray, or vapor away from the application site. Pesticides have a greater potential to drift when they are applied through nozzles designed to deliver small droplets. Small droplets are lightweight and can be carried in the wind further than heavier, medium, or coarse droplets. Wind also plays an important role in the distance vapors or dust can travel. As the distance from the sprayer to the ground increases, so does the likelihood that pesticide vapors or dust will be impacted by any existing wind. Pesticides that are not absorbed by plants or soil can move from the site and contaminate other areas. Application during precipitation events may reduce the efficacy of the application, as well as lead to off-site movement of the pesticide. Non-target organisms are plants or animals that are not the intended targets of pesticide applications. Before applying a pesticide, check for the presence of livestock areas and wildlife and beneficial insect habitats that might be negatively impacted by the pesticide. Only properly trained pesticide handlers who are wearing the required PPE may be in the treated area while the pesticide is being applied. You must not apply pesticides in a manner that results in contact with workers or other persons. To prevent pesticide exposure, workers and other persons are restricted from entering an application exclusion zone, or AEZ, when pesticide applications are taking place. AEZs are the areas surrounding pesticide application equipment that exist only during outdoor production pesticide applications. You and your employer should discuss the AEZ before making the application. You must temporarily suspend the application if a worker or other person is in any portion of the AEZ. You may not proceed until you can ensure that the pesticide will not contact anyone that is in the AEZ, including areas that extend beyond the boundary of the establishment. You must either read or be informed of, in a manner you can understand, all sections of the pesticide product labeling applicable to the safe use of the pesticide, including label use directions and restrictions. The product label is the most important part of the pesticide packaging. Again, you must follow the portions of the labeling applicable to the safe use of the pesticide. The labeling will be available to you at all times during handler activities. The pesticide label has a number of sections that you should be familiar with. The brand name of the pesticide is found at the top of the first page of the label. Do not choose a pesticide product by brand name alone. Many companies use the same basic name with only minor variations to designate entirely different pesticide chemicals. Below the brand name is the listing of the active ingredients that control the pest. Pesticide products with similar brand names may contain different active ingredients or different percentages of active ingredients. The EPA registration number for the product is also found on the front page of the label. EPA registration numbers indicate that the pesticide product has been registered and the label approved by the EPA. The signal words, caution, warning, or danger, indicate how toxic the product is based on its acute toxicity. Signal words are found in large type on every pesticide label. Pesticides that are highly toxic if they are inhaled, swallowed, or come in contact with the skin will contain a picture of a skull and crossbones and the words danger and poison on the label. Danger products are highly toxic. Pesticides with the warning signal word are moderately toxic. The signal word caution means those pesticides are slightly toxic. The first aid section lists what you should do if you swallow or inhale the pesticide, or get it on your skin or in your eyes. The label pictured here clearly states that inducing vomiting is the correct treatment if the product is swallowed, but it is critical to refer to the label or safety data sheet in case of an emergency to be very sure. The precautionary statements provide information about how to protect yourself and sensitive areas and organisms from exposure. Precautionary statements indicate ways in which the pesticide may be particularly hazardous to people and animals, the environment, and physical and chemical hazards. The required personal protective equipment for handlers is included in this section. The Directions for Use section lists information on mixing, loading, application, storage, and disposal. These directions must be followed to ensure safe and effective use. The Agricultural Use Requirements section is specific to the Worker Protection Standard. It states that the pesticide can only be used in accordance with its labeling and with the WPS. It contains the restricted entry interval and PPE requirements for early entry workers. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, is worn to protect your body from contact with pesticides and can best reduce exposure when worn correctly and maintained properly. The pesticide label lists what PPE must be worn. PPE may vary depending on the specific task. Make sure to review the relevant PPE requirements for mixing, loading, and/or handling in the precautionary statements section of the label. Your employer must provide you with the PPE for the job that you will be doing. PPE must be provided in clean and operating condition, and employers must make sure it is worn correctly. Inspect your PPE before each day of use and repair or dispose of any damaged PPE. When taking off PPE, be careful not to get pesticides on your skin or inner clothing. Wash the outside of your gloves while you are still wearing them. If possible, keep your gloves on while taking off any other PPE. Touch the outsides of the PPE as little as possible when removing it. Wash your hands, face, and any other exposed skin. Use lots of soap and water. Do not wear home or take home PPE that you have used. It is the responsibility of your employer to do the following. At the end of the day, clean PPE before reuse. All clean PPE must be either dried thoroughly before being stored or must be put in a well-ventilated place to dry. PPE must be stored separately from work clothing and apart from pesticide-contaminated areas. Do not store PPE in the pesticide storage area. Any contaminated PPE must be kept separate and washed separately from any other clothing or laundry. Any person who cleans or launders PPE at the establishment must be told that it may be contaminated with pesticides, about the potential harmful effects of exposure to pesticides, and the correct ways to handle and clean it to protect themselves from exposure. Your employer may direct you to complete these tasks. Before you work with a pesticide that requires respiratory protection, your employer must make sure that you participate in a medical evaluation, respirator fit testing, and respirator use and maintenance training. You must be cleared by a licensed healthcare professional before you can wear the respirator. Based on your answers to a confidential medical history questionnaire, a physician or medical professional may require that you schedule a follow-up visit or provide additional information to determine if you are physically able to use a respirator. If you are given medical clearance, your employer must make sure that the respirator that you will use fits properly. The respirator must be fit tested at least annually. Once you are medically cleared, you must receive training at least annually on how to properly use, store, and care for your respirator. If the weather is warm or hot and you are wearing PPE, be aware of heat stress. You can get very sick if your body gets too hot. Many symptoms of heat illness are similar to symptoms of pesticide poisoning. You may feel tired and weak, have a headache, feel sick to your stomach, and get dizzy. If you're not sure what is making you ill, get help right away. Get out of the direct sunlight and away from pesticides if possible. If you suspect that someone has severe heat illness, it is very important to cool the person down as quickly as possible and get the person to a doctor right away. If you are new to the job or the weather suddenly becomes much hotter, you may need to adjust gradually to working in the heat. Drink plenty of water before, during, and after work. This concludes the handler training. If you have any questions about what has been discussed, please ask those questions now.